Where do you want me? Okay, I'm gonna sit here. Okay. Good. All right.
All right.
Right here.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think you got some fans here.
I have a live mic. All right.
Yeah, how are you? It's nice to see you.
Standing room only. What more could we ask for? Hello and welcome to this exciting event this evening. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm Barbara Romsek. I'm Dean of the School of Public Affairs, and I'm thrilled to see this wonderful turnout of our students and our guests. We are honored to have Senator Elizabeth Warren here with us this evening to share her thoughts on economic history and our future. In fact, you may not know this, but AU School of Public Affairs was founded during an earlier time of economic challenge. In 1934, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the New Deal legislation, he needed trained federal experts to implement his plans for an expanded government role. So the School of Public Affairs at American University was created for that purpose. 80 years later, and 220,000 students later, the School of Public Affairs is one of the best in the country. Given that the economy is always one of the most talked about issues in a national election, Senator Warren's presentation this evening is as timely as they come. Now, I now have the pleasure of introducing Jamie Raskin. Today, Jamie teaches at American University's Washington College of Law. He has long been an admirer and a friend of Senator Warren's. He was a student at Harvard Law when then Professor Warren was teaching. He tells us that although he did not enroll in her bankruptcy class, he used to sneak in anyway. Now, Jamie is the professor here at AU. He's taught more than 3,000 students over the last 25 years. Jamie has a long list of other accomplishments. Among those, he's a best-selling author of 2 books and founding director of our law school's program on law and government. He's a state senator in Maryland, representing Silver Spring and Tacoma Park. In this role, he successfully introduced and championed numerous significant pieces of legislation. Jamie has been described as one of Maryland's top 10 most effective senators. Without further ado, please welcome Maryland State Senator Jamie Raskin, who will introduce Senator Warren.
Thank you. What an honor. Are you guys fired up or what? I'm about to introduce to you a real senator, America's senator. And I say that knowing that technically she's from Massachusetts, but she represents all of us, right? She comes from a long line of great senators there. We got Charles Sumner. We got Senator Edward Brooke. We've got the great Senator Ted Kennedy, who's been to this campus. And now we've got the amazing Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. I read a biography of Thomas Jefferson, and he was in France once, and he did a toast, and he said that every person on earth who loves freedom has 2 countries, his own and France. And I feel that every person in America who loves democracy has 2 states, his or her own, and Massachusetts.
All right.
Because of Elizabeth Warren. So, all right, nobody loves politicians, but everybody loves Elizabeth Warren, right? Well, not exactly everybody. Not the rapacious CEOs, right? And not the inside dealers on Wall Street. Not the presidents of phony for-profit universities that rip off their students.
That's right.
Not the sweetheart defense contractors, and not governors who create traffic jams for their own people. They don't love Elizabeth Warren. These people cower in fear when Elizabeth Warren enters the room, but everybody else stands up to cheer when she shows up. I don't know if you saw Elizabeth Warren yesterday speaking some truth. I don't know if you saw her cross-examine the CEO of Wells Fargo, who was presiding over a scam, as she put it, making hundreds of millions of dollars, pumping up the cross-selling in his bank while the companies squeezed $12 an hour employees to rip off the consumers. And I was thinking when I was watching that, what kind of a difference it made to have Senator Elizabeth Warren in the US Senate on the Banking Committee and in that hearing room. And I was trying to imagine whether anybody else could crystallize the public outrage or articulate the moral offense or the legal violations that were embodied in what took place at Wells Fargo, as far as we know, allegedly, as they say. And no, it's very hard to imagine that. Senator Warren is singular, extraordinary. She brings a unique voice to American politics. She is the undisputed master of the questions of finance and money and economics that go to the heart of American inequality today. She is the indispensable senator. But then as I watched the other senators after her, and I watched them watching her, and then I watched them taking their turns in the questioning, I realized something else truly remarkable about Elizabeth Warren. She has empowered and emboldened the other senators to do their jobs much better than they were doing them before she got to Washington. And every day she reminds them, she reminds all of us in public office to seek justice and the common good, not to serve special private interests, what the founders called factions, and not to serve the interests of private money. So she's not only the indispensable senator, she is the exemplary senator. She is the one that the rest of us have to look to. So, one of America's great law professors, she may not be teaching in the classroom this semester, but every time she goes to battle for the American people, it's an education for public servants and citizens across the land. Ladies and gentlemen, students and faculty and staff of American University, other people who snuck into the room, and it is my great honor to present to you the senior senator from Massachusetts, the first woman ever elected to the US Senate from Massachusetts, the woman who drives Donald Trump totally crazy, although I admit that's a short trip. The public intellectual who created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau,
Yay!
which is blowing the whistle, on consumer scams all over the country, predation against the American people. My future colleague, a brilliant scholar of bankruptcy law, the only Harvard law professor ever to have attended a public law school, Rutgers, the Boston Globe 2009 Bostonian of the Year, National Law Journal's pick for one of the top 50 most influential women in the law, Time Magazine's pick for one of the 100 most influential people in the world, and American University's pick for the most courageous, tough-minded, and compassionate champion of the American people, the great Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. Oh, that was fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are great. This is fabulous. This is great. So, thank you very much. Thank you, Jamie, for the really extraordinary introduction. Thank you, Dean, for welcoming me here today. Thank you, American University. I am grateful for this. This is great. So, this is an experiment that we're doing here. You know, what I feel like I want to do is I want to whip out my thumbs and have a conversation with Donald Trump. But, you know, you got to have a lot of different things, a lot of tools in your toolbox to get things done. And this is an opportunity to talk about something a little longer, a little more. And it develops off actually the work I did as an academic, off my teaching. Only back then I had like these really horrible little kind of slides, and I had to act out the various parts of it. So I got a little fancier, and I took this around Massachusetts a little bit this summer to just kind of try it out on different people and keep working on a story about what's happening in America. And this is my first chance to take it on the road, so to speak. So you all are the folks I'm experimenting with, and I just thank you very much for your hospitality and for doing this. And for anybody who wants to, when we get through, we can all do selfies, because it didn't happen if you didn't do selfies. So we'll line up and do them down here, okay? All right. We'll figure out how to do this. Okay, that'll be right after the quiz. Okay, that we'll be doing that part. All right, so this is, some of you know me as a senator, and it has been a great honor to be serving the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the United States Senate. I love it. Some of you know me from my days of fighting for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and trying to set that up. That was fun. Or when I was working on Wall Street working here, trying to bring some accountability to Wall Street following the big crash in 2008. A few of you may know, as Jamie did, that I taught for a long time at Harvard Law School. But the key part is that this has not always been my life. I had a very different life before this. My parents worked really hard. My dad sold carpeting and fencing, and he ended up as a maintenance man. My mom raised 4 kids. Those are my 3 brothers, with my mom in the middle. I am the cool short one in sunglasses. Let's face it, you're born cool or you're not. That's just how it is. See? But we were a family that was always hanging on to our place in the middle class pretty much by our fingernails. And things got pretty bad when I was in junior high. All 3 of my brothers at that point were off in the military. My daddy had a heart attack, and we lost our car. The medical bills piled up, and we were so close to losing our home that you could feel the foundation shake. And we were out of options when my mom, who was 50 years old, took her first job. She is the tall one in the plaid dress. She went to work at Sears, answering the telephones. It was a minimum wage job so that we could make the mortgage payments and keep food on the table. She saved our home, and she saved our family. But it was really, really hard, and we came really, really close to complete disaster. And for a lot of families, this story does not end well. For a lot of families, no matter how hard they work, no matter how many coupons they cut, no matter how hard they try to save, there is never enough to make ends meet. And for some families, African American families, Latino families, the system has been rigged for decades, so there never will be enough to make ends meet. And none of this will get any better unless we make some fundamental changes in this country. We all know that America is the great economic engine of the world. There have been some ups and downs, but for decades, the productivity and innovation of the American workers and American businesses has kept GDP on an upward climb. Today, many corporations are recording record profits. The stock market is booming. Inflation is low. Unemployment has dropped below 5%. All of the official markers of a healthy economy are there. It looks great. But the question is, great for whom? Back in the early 1970s, families were doing well enough that they were putting away nearly 12% of their disposable income in savings. And revolving debt, the kind you put on credit cards, that was just a small sliver, about 0.5%. In other words, families had money in the bank, not much debt. That was what was meant by a solid middle class. Today, those numbers have reversed. On average, savings have been cut by 2/3 while debt has exploded. Families today carry 15 times more debt than families did a generation ago. Less savings, more debt. Families are living on the edge of a financial cliff, and it is a long way down. Today, 1 in 3 Americans with a credit file is dealing with a debt collector, bills that aren't paid. 18-year-olds are taking on tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. Last year, nearly 1 million families filed for bankruptcy. That is just a little less than all of the households in Boston and Seattle and Cleveland and Atlanta combined. And it's happening every single year. You know, the American economy may look great from the outside, but for most of the families living in it, this economy looks very different. So the question I want to talk about tonight is, how did this happen? How did families pick up so much debt? How did they get squeezed so hard? The easy explanation is, let's blame ourselves. Fancy cars, new iPhones, eating out too much. Most people assume that Americans' debt problems come from wasteful spending. But here's the thing, it's just not true. In fact, over the last 30 years or so, families have actually cut a lot of their spending. All this will be adjusted for inflation. Adjusted for inflation, the average family today is spending less on food. Yes, that includes eating out. Less on food, including eating out, less on clothing, less on furniture, and less on appliances than they did a generation ago. No matter how much your Aunt Edna shakes her finger at young people today, the data show that American families are not frittering away their money. They've watched their nickels, but boy, have they been slammed by the big stuff. The big fixed expenses are staggering. Families today spend 57% more on their homes, 104% more on health insurance. College, even at a state school, is through the roof. A kid today will pay tuition and fees nearly 3 times higher than in the early 1970s. And with more parents of small children headed off to work long hours, the cost of childcare is enough to rock back almost any family. Yeah, look at that one. It is no wonder that American families have blown through their savings and are taking on debts. After they deal with the big fixed costs, there's just not much left over for them to work with. These changes mean that families today face a lot more risk. You know, think of it this way. When my parents needed extra money for something like car repairs or school shoes for my brothers and me, they could cut back a little on everyday items to get by. And then the big ones, when my daddy got sick, my mother could go out to work to pay for the bills. It was a minimum wage job, but it was a new paycheck for our family. Today's families, they just don't have that kind of flexibility. They can't cut back on their health insurance or their child care. Lots of families today have only one parent, and even most two-parent families already have everyone working. So when something goes wrong, when someone gets sick or when work hours get cut, they don't have a way to pull in another paycheck. So what do? They either end up taking on a ton of credit card debt, or they go belly up on the mortgage. So how did this happen? What happened? What changed in our country? What changed? Policy. We changed our policies. We went from a country that strengthened its middle class to one that bet on its wealthiest citizens and hoped that the benefits would eventually trickle down for everyone else. So here's the story I want to tell. From the 1790s to the 1930s, America was a boom and bust economy. Things would go well, the economy would grow for a number of years, and then inevitably, another recession, another depression would hit, and American families would struggle with lost jobs and lost homes. But then, when the Great Depression hit in 1929, we pulled up our socks and we said, we can do better. We passed laws that made us all safer. Look at this gap following 1929. No more crashes for nearly 80 years. We also spent this time creating some real opportunities, and we built a great middle class. So let's talk about that. What did we do? First, we decided to regulate the big banks. This is what happens coming out of 1929. Glass-Steagall, yep, that is Glass and Steagall standing up there. We passed FDIC insurance. We created the SEC. All these things to make sure that we wouldn't have another crash. And it wasn't just banking. We broke up monopolies. We doubled down on enforcing antitrust laws. We figured that if small businesses and startups were going to get a real chance, then they shouldn't get crushed by the giants before they could ever get started. Second, we decided to invest in ourselves, in our people. We invested in education with programs like federal aid for K through 12, the GI Bill, NDEA loans, and world-class universities. We built infrastructure. This is the national highway system. We invested in ambitious research like DARPA, and we sent a man to the moon. We built Social Security and Medicare because we said we'd all pitch in together to make sure that after a lifetime of hard work, people could retire with dignity. We strengthened the right to join a union so that workers could share in the wealth they produced. And yes, that's Frances Perkins, the first woman cabinet member and the first Secretary of Labor in the United States. Pretty cool. Now, let me be clear about this. Things were not perfect. Systematic racism, sexism, homophobia, bigotry meant that opportunities were not spread around equally. But over time, we were bending in the right direction. And these government investments in education, in infrastructure, in research, let us turn our hard work into real opportunities. Before 1980, we made a real effort through our government to invest in this country's future. We spent money on education and research, areas that benefited large portions of our population. All of us together, through government, helped create opportunities. And here's the deal, it worked. Before 1980, 90% of America happens to be wearing a Red Sox baseball cap. Hey, you make the slides, you decide what baseball cap they wear. But this represents, I just want you to get how this one's laid up. This is 90% of America, this is 10% of America. 90% of America got 70% of all the new income generated in this country. Think about that. Before 1980, from 1935 to 1980. Not perfect, but pretty darn good. This was an America where people could afford to work and have a family. This was an America where I could go to college for $50 a semester. Yeah. I know, it always sounds like, and then I landed from the moon, right? But think about that. How does that happen? Because we invested in those public universities and put the money in there to teach our kids. This was an America where my mother could support our family and pay a mortgage on a minimum wage job. Today, that just couldn't happen. Send the kids to college for $50 a semester? Right. Pay a mortgage on a minimum wage? Today, a minimum wage job will not pay the bills for a mama and a baby in a one-room apartment. The reality of American middle-class life today is very different than it was in my parents' era or even in my own. And that change is the direct result of very deliberate policy decisions made by our government, the decisions to invest in the richest Americans. Part one of trickle down was to rewrite the tax laws. Politicians in Washington decided that the wealthiest families should pay lower tax rates than middle-class Americans. Tax loopholes made it profitable for multinational corporations to go overseas. Giant corporations could stash their money in foreign countries and let the small businesses at home be the ones who paid the full freight. With all of these tax loopholes in place, corporations went from paying about 30% of the tax revenue generated in the United States to paying about 10% of it. And when that happened, it was then easy for the Republicans to say, sorry, there's no money for education, no money for roads, no money for medical research. And look, if we're being honest, there were lots of Democrats who said the same thing too. So, as the wealthiest corporations paid less and less, the result was just exactly what you would expect. We don't make the investments that we need. Our infrastructure is crumbling. Yeah, that is the Mississippi River Bridge in Minnesota that fell down. Overall, infrastructure across America today gets a grade of D+ from the American Society of Civil Engineers. As a proportion of GDP, our spending on research and development is down more than a third since the 1970s. Think about that. Spending less on the basics, on research. And what about education? That great ticket to the middle class. Well, Head Start in public education isn't a priority for those who can send their kids to private preschools and expensive colleges. Making sure our kids get a good education, all our kids, including African American kids and non-English speaking kids and special needs kids, takes money. And those tax cuts have been made up somewhere. They've been made up out of the hides of our children. The same is true in higher ed, where the costs of an education are going up, but government support at state schools is now down more than 20% in the last 30 years. After years of underfunding higher education, it is no surprise that student loan debt is exploding. So that was part one. Part two of trickle down was to fire the cops. Not the cops on Main Street, cops on Wall Street. It was called deregulation. But what it really meant was that a lot of powerful corporations could do whatever they wanted and there'd be no one there to stop them. Laws to keep banking separate from investing were repealed. We got rid of Glass-Steagall. The SEC was neutered. Antitrust enforcement shrunk. Giant businesses expanded and small businesses got crowded out. Without a cop on the beat, Wall Street got even more greedy and more reckless. They built business models, cheating people on mortgages, on credit cards, on payday loans. They loaded up on risks and they put the whole economy in danger. And we know how this turned out. In 2008, we had the greatest economic crash since the Great Depression. And anyone who thinks that the banks have changed their ways, just rerun the video from yesterday with Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo built its business model on cheating their customers. That's how Wall Street still thinks you can get ahead in this country. Now look, all of these changes are really bad for hardworking families. But there was one more change that truly cemented these problems. The system itself was corrupted to serve the wealthy and the powerful. Today, most politicians aren't working for the average American family. They are working for wealthy people and corporations that have big money. Billions of dollars flow into the campaign coffers of American politicians to tilt them in favor of continuing support for the wealthy. And it's not just campaign contributions. It is so much more. Look at lobbying. No one has the exact dollars for how much money was spent on lobbying in the early 1980s, but it is estimated that politically active organizations spent about $200 million a year on direct lobbying. Now, that is a lot of money. But by 2002, that number had skyrocketed to 1.8 billion. And by 2012, it had reached the shocking number of 3.3 billion. And about 3/4 of it benefits no one but corporate America. CEOs have realized that spending millions on lobbying can result in billions in profits for their companies. And campaign contributions and lobbying are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to corporate influence. Business executives and government officials spin through a revolving door, making sure that the interests of powerful corporations are always carefully protected. Giant Wall Street businesses offer millions of dollars to high-ranking executives to work in Washington for a few years, making policies that benefit exactly the same Wall Street businesses that sent them there. And corporations and trade groups fund study after study that just so happen to find that that special rule or exception that the industry wants is what we need. And that's why, despite tons of evidence showing how bad these economic policies are for working families, that's why nothing changes. Remember the number that showed from 1935 to 1980 as total income increased across the country, that the 90%, everybody outside the top 10%, the 90% got 70% of all income generated? Well, those days are gone. From 1980 to 2016, total income, remember our GDP line? Total income kept right on growing. But now it was divided very differently. Since 1980, the share of new income that went to the 90% is almost zero. Nothing. Not even 1%. If you look at market income, the income that individuals earn before taxes and before government transfers like Social Security, the top 10% has taken nearly all new income generated in this country since 1980. And for African Americans, trickle down was a double disaster. Dragged down by more than a century of systemic racism, the black-white wealth gap has been there for as long as we have been counting. But during the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s and in the 70s, as it gained steam, about 1/3 of the black-white wealth gap closed. All right, so we were beginning to push it in the right direction. Then, starting in the Reagan years and forward, that trend reversed itself again with a vengeance. From 1984 to 2013, the wealth gap between black and white families actually tripled. Think about that. The economy is growing. Remember how GDP keeps going up. Our country is getting richer. But the economy is growing only for those at the top. Everyone else is left behind. And here's one more piece of the puzzle. The green line shows union membership from 1934 forward as you watch it grow and as you watch it fall. The orange line shows income inequality as you watch it fall and then as you watch it grow. When union membership goes up, income inequality goes down. And the reverse is also true. When union membership goes down, inequality keeps climbing. Unions help make sure that the economy and the government works for everyone. And here's one more part that makes this story really scary. A government that just works for those at the top is a government that can't address other problems, some of the biggest problems that we're facing. Look, the world is heating up, and climate change could destroy much of our land and much of our oceans. But so long as big coal and big oil are calling the shots in Washington, there won't be any changes. Trade deals force U.S. workers to compete head-on with imprisoned workers in child labor in Guatemala and Georgia. But so long as multinational corporations call the shots in our trade negotiations, that won't change. And a tech boom is leaving millions of people scrambling to piece together enough work to support themselves. But so long as Washington lobbyists keep the Labor Department at bay, people will work harder and harder and have less and less. We face big problems, really big problems. But the biggest problem we face is political. Yeah, that's David Koch, one half of the Koch brothers. They are dumping hundreds of millions of dollars right now into the 2016 elections. And thanks to guys like him, deliberate government policies that once favored working people now favor a privileged class, billionaires and giant multinational corporations. Okay, that was a cheerful way to spend your evening. We'll just all quit now. You know, and I get it. You could look at this and say, let's all just quit. There's no hope. But actually, the reason I'm here is because I think this is an optimistic story. Nothing is inevitable, and that is the good news. If the government has been taken over by the rich and the powerful, then the rest of us can take it back. That's what I believe. That's what I believe. That's what this is about. We can make our government change its priorities and once again serve American families and build a future for ourselves and for our children. We need to be making regulations that create a level playing field between the big guys and the little guys, and we need to enforce the law for everyone. You know, sitting there at that hearing yesterday, what I stopped to think about is a kid who gets caught with a few ounces of drugs is looking at jail time. But a CEO who helps his bank launder billions of dollars of drug money or cheat millions of dollars from consumers walks away with a bonus. That is not right. We have to change that. Not right. Not right. We need to invest in education from preschool to college so that we have opportunities not just for some of our kids, but opportunities for all of our kids. We need to be investing in clean energy infrastructure to help create new technology, new jobs, a healthier planet. We need to be investing in medical and scientific research because curing cancer and curing Alzheimer's and Parkinson's brings down the long-term costs of healthcare, and it helps people we love. We need a government that works for us. Now look, Republicans make government the brunt of jokes. And sure, I get it. Government sometimes gets things really wrong. But there is a difference between a government that tries to work for us and needs help getting it right, and a government that just plain old is working for somebody else. Look at it this way. A weak government can't police Wall Street. A starving government can't invest in students. A torn government can't move decisively against climate change. A captured government can't negotiate a better trade deal. Without government, we don't build a stronger nation. And without government, we don't push each other to become a better people. We need a government that works for all of us. That's what we need. That's what we need. Yep. We know what we need. So the question is it realistic? Come on, Lizzie. Could we really make any of these investments without going broke? If we tried it, will we just completely bankrupt ourselves? You know, too many people are very sophisticated, and they say this is just pie in the sky. Well, they are flat wrong. There are a lot of examples, but I'm going to give you just one example to show you what we could do. If we got rid of one tax loophole, and this is the loophole that today lets corporations write off bonuses in excess of $1 million and get all the rest of the taxpayers to subsidize it. If we just closed up that one loophole, they could still go ahead and make the bonuses. They just don't get a tax break for making it after $1 million. How much money would we save? Answer? $55 billion over 10 years. Corporations can still give their bonuses, but the tax code won't subsidize it. That would produce $55 billion. So now let's ask the question, what could we do with $55 billion? Huh? That's a fun question. Closing this one loophole would give all of the people on Social Security, seniors, veterans, Americans with disabilities, the same percentage raise that the top CEOs got last year. I kind of like that one, right? How about it? How about it? Or it's just about enough to let every young person with college loans refinance your student loans down to a lower rate. There we go. One loophole. Or it would be enough to replace every water pipe in Flint, Michigan, and 67 other cities in America. Yeah. Or it would be just about enough to double the amount that the National Institute of Health spends on both Alzheimer's and cancer research. Not bad. Now multiply what we get from closing one loophole to about 20 other giant loopholes. And think about what we could do if we just said that this country and this tax system should work for the American people. These are changes that the majority of Americans support. Now, I know if you watch the news, you probably think there is no issue in America that more than 50% of people support. And it is true. There are some serious issues that divide us, and that's how it is. But these issues that I'm talking about, the basic core, how we build a future issues, they bring us together. Raise the minimum wage, refinance student loans, adopt family leave, pass equal pay for equal work, regulate the banks, expand Social Security. National surveys tell us that somewhere between 60 and 75% of all Americans support these changes. The progressive agenda isn't the Democratic agenda, it is the American agenda. It is Congress that is wildly out of step with the American people. Out of step because too many elected officials have sold out to corporate money and corporate lobbyists. You know, the next time you hear about gridlock, keep in mind, It's working for somebody. Special interests have invested millions and millions of dollars to keep things just the way they are. Don't close those loopholes. Don't hold Wall Street CEOs responsible for breaking the law. Don't shut down the dirtiest coal plants in America. Those lobbyists and those PR machines have done an incredible job of convincing most Americans that the situation we're in today is inevitable and that there is nothing they can do to make a difference. But we can make a difference. They might have the money and power, but we have our voices and our votes. And there is a whole lot more of us than there is of them. Yep. So I want to make a point that people sometimes forget. Change is possible, and the way we know change is possible is because we have made it happen before. After the financial crash, the big banks spent more than $1 million a day, for more than a year, to block financial reforms, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But we won, and now the CFPB is out there doing its job. How's that, right? We got it. And look, before you all worry that you're going to turn around, go home, and you're going to say, what just happened here? I was like applauding for some government agency, you know? I must be turning into a nerd. I just want to remind you that little Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has already forced the biggest corporations in America to return nearly $12 billion directly to people who were cheated. It has already handled nearly 1 million complaints, and it is the one that hauled out Wells Fargo for a public flogging yesterday. Not bad. That's government that works, yes. And there's action at the state and local level. 17 states are raising the minimum wage in 2016, including states with Republican governors. Change is possible. Now look, I know there are a lot of powerful interests lined up against us, and I know that a lot of times we don't win. But the worst thing we can do is to lay down without a fight. You can't win what you don't fight for, and you can't make progress if you don't aim high. And that's what this is about. Yep. So, how do we get change? First, raise your voice. Change starts when we take the time to tell our cranky uncle or our skeptical sister why they should care about the prospects of American families and what they can do about it. Talk about these issues. It matters. And second, raise your hands. Volunteer for change, whether it's to get someone elected, to get a law passed, or to stop something that's really wrong. And I know that's asking a lot. I know that everyone in this room is short on time, but democracy won't survive on its own. It needs people to participate. And one more really important thing, raise questions. Don't let the people who represent you skate by without taking a stand on who they plan to work for. So I picked 4 questions. You can pick your own, but this will get you started. 4 questions that everyone, regardless of political party, should be forced to answer if they want to go to Washington and work for you. First, will you fight to overturn Citizens United and reduce the influence of giant corporations and billionaires in our democratic system? That's where we got to start. Second, will you put more cops on Wall Street and tell them to hold corporate executives personally liable when they break the law? That's what I want. Third, this is where you'll really sweat a politician. Will you commit to raise more tax revenue from the top 10% to support education and infrastructure and basic research? Make them pay. Yeah. And fourth, will you strengthen the rights of all workers, full-time, part-time, gig, and independent contractors, higher Social Security, family and medical leave, the things that let workers build a real life for themselves going forward, including unions? Yes, and they do this. So, ask a few questions, because it all comes back to the personal. When I was a young mom with 2 little kids, and I used to dye my hair brown, I was trying to start a career. There were days when I really thought I wasn't going to make it. But I got lucky. First, my Aunt Bee moved in to help with the kids. And second time around, I married the right guy. I highly recommend it. But I could build something with my life because I lived in an America that invested in kids like me. An America where you didn't have to go into debt to get an education. An America where opportunities kept opening up. An America where you could fail, pick yourself up, and try again. And that is an America where the daughter of a maintenance man and a minimum wage worker at Sears could end up in the United States Senate. I believe in that America. I believe we can build that America for all of us. Thank you. Thank you.